The Slicing the Pie series is by far one of the most popular series on my channel, as I believe there isn't really anything like it out there. Covering the philosophies of each of the Shards and Wedges of Magic the Gathering is really what launched this channel into the trajectory it is on. And so, to celebrate that, I decided to put it all together into one single video for your viewing pleasure. I trimmed down some of the extra parts and edited each episode together to be one seamless experience that I know you'll enjoy. Before we get into it though, I just wanted to give a special shout out to my Patreons. Your added support to this channel is greatly appreciated. If you want to become a Patreon, I'll have more information at the end. As always though, leaving a comment and a like on this video will always remain what makes this all worthwhile. Thanks for your time. Now, enjoy the video. When combining three colors, the result is something that is inherently complex. Therefore, we will have to lay the groundwork before we can dive into the different philosophies of the color combination in question. From there, we will be able to learn what versions of Esper are possible with the colors that are at our disposal. I will be dissecting the colors in question, as well as the colors that are not in the shard. That way, we will better understand the Esper combination, and we'll be able to create philosophies that fit within that framework. The best place to start is with the color that bridges the gap between the two enemy colors of that shard. That's why I'm glad we're starting this series off with Esper, as our bridge will have the task of bringing two iconic enemies together in white and black. In the case of Esper, our bridge color is blue, so let's start things off with expanding our bridge. Then from there, we can talk about how blue's interactions affect each of its neighbors. Blue is the color that is always looking for perfection, not just in itself, but in everything around it. Because of this guiding ideal, blue is the color that is always hungry to learn and to create at a constant rate. Blue is never satisfied with good enough and believes there is always room for improvement and discovery. Simple enough, right? But how does this relate to the colors that share its shard? To learn this, we will have to discuss how each adjacent color interacts with our bridge color. Let's start with blue and white. When this combination comes together, we have a philosophy that believes in perfection of society through creation of an ever-evolving system of laws, government, and infrastructure. Blue-white is confident that together, we can reach heights that alone we may not. So what then does blue see in black? And what philosophy is created from their merger? Well, it's in black's unwavering hand that blue may find answers in places it may otherwise be afraid to look. Then blue opens black's eyes to the endless possibilities found in expanding your thought. You see, when blue and black are brought together, we have a combination that believes in self-improvement unhindered by morality, and that nothing is out of reach for those who take it. With this understanding, we can start to get an idea of what the Shard of Esper might believe in. But before we can dissect this shard properly, we'll have to take the next step and learn about what Esper's missing colors tell us about this combination. In this case, it would be the colors red and green. So let's start with red. The lack of red mana tells us that Esper is a color combination that is not guided by emotion. We can then assume that any variation of this shard will lack any empathy or impulsiveness. Esper is a color that acts in a cold and calculated manner, with no room for fleeting emotions. Next, the lack of green mana tells us that there will never be any regard for the natural order, or the circle of light. What's more is that Esper doesn't try to fulfill a destiny, it will instead carve out its own path. Esper, then, is the shard that thinks only of what can be done, and not what should be done, at least as far as the natural order is concerned. To Esper, nature and its inhabitants are nothing more than a resource. Alright, so now that we have crafted the framework for our discussion, we'll have to put it all to use. To that end, we will discuss three possible versions of what white, blue, and black's relationship could potentially look like, as the traditional Esper perspective isn't the whole story. Just as we've learned in the Duality series, there are many interpretations to any color and their combinations. So let's start with the first concept, perfection through ruthless order. So we know that blue and black, when combined, are interested in self-improvement unhindered by morality, while on the other hand, White and Blue believe that society as a whole may be perfected through the use of systems. So, of course, the first clashes with Black and White over the idea of improvement of self or improvement of society. What Blue says is that, no, we must improve society, for if society may prosper, then so too will I. You see, for a world to reach its potential, it must create an environment where potential may be cultivated. And if a person is not interested in this idea, then to Esper, that person has no place in it. Esper is not the combination to waste its energy on those who do not share its vision. This is a combination that does have what's best in mind for its kin or those under its rule, but it will not tolerate those who would step against the flow of its ideals. You see, where one might be influenced to find order through peace, an ideal guided by empathy, this just isn't the case for Esper, as being devoid of red mana leaves no room for trivial emotions such as these. They know that only under a unified front, guided only by logic, may we have any progress. And in progress, we gain power, and through power, perfection. To those who would step out of line, Esper will use the prisons of White, the re-education of Blue, or the swift executions of Black. In any case, a culture is created under the watch of this version of Esper. One where the ideals of progress trump individual rights. Wisdom can be summed up in 2 rules: control what you can, eliminate what you can't. What we have here is a belief system that culls weakness from its ranks so that what is left is better for it. I mean, you can't argue with results, right? Okay, so now you see what happens when we lean into Blue and White's idea of an ideal society, mixed with Black's ruthlessness. Let's move into our next version, which leans more into Blue-Black side. The power of unrestricted knowledge is an ideal that supersedes humanity and attempts to grasp into the darkness for answers. Esper puts value in the concept that, to obtain perfection, knowledge must be unrestricted by morality, and that we must be willing to look for answers from those who reside in darkness. Then, within those answers that others have neglected, we may evolve our understanding of our place within the world. The issue is that the knowledge that Esper values is one that is often rejected by humanity as a whole. So this pushes Esper into the shadows. In the previous example, we had a group that controlled swaths of society or a whole world. This version instead must rely on like-minded individuals who share their same fervor and resolve. This version of Esper utilizes White's piety and belief in a higher power, Black's willingness to seek out what is forbidden, and Blue's curiosity, all combining to form cults or dark brotherhoods. From there, they may gain an understanding and control over the powers that lay outside of man's grasp. You see, true enlightenment may only be obtained by those willing to stare into the void, and from there, man may evolve to reach heights that it would otherwise keep at arm's length. In White, these bonds are formed. In Blue, the insatiable desire to learn is fostered, and in Black, that curiosity is extended to the dark places of the multiverse. We know that without any green mana present, and with the lack of emotion found in red, coupled with its already strong belief in perfection and order, Esper is a shard that views everything as a resource to be used for its ambitions. White states that we must all add to the collective. Black will consume without much thought to its consequences, and Blue will look for any advantage it can. What we get is a shard that combines all of these aspects into a philosophy that perceives the world around it, including its people, as a resource. Anything, whether it be humanoid life or nature itself, has a more useful or productive form than what it currently is. It is not necessarily evolution, but a sure and careful hand, crafting raw life into a useful machine of progress. If a tree can be cut down to make a house, should it not? If a death can create an endless servant, why should we mourn a life lost? If flesh can become machine, isn't that peak efficiency? If we set aside our worries of ethics and empathy, we can then take what is lying dormant and unused and put it to work. To some, they may see extinction of life, but to Esper, they see the use of life. There is more we can do for the world than simply exist, and this is extended to the plane itself. We should not fear progress. We should devote ourselves to it. There's not much more to be said about Esper and its beliefs. It keeps its intentions quite clear. This is a shard whose philosophy is rooted in a desire to perfect society, a goal unhindered by morality. On some planes, it may be on a large scale, an unrelenting hand that forcefully guides society towards an ever-shifting view of an ideal world, while on other planes, this concept may be carried out on a small scale with others who share its vision, one of knowledge found in forgotten dark corners. Only through knowledge may we be set free, and that knowledge may come from places that the weak may be too afraid to touch. Only through knowledge may we be set free, and that knowledge must come from places the weak may be too afraid to touch. No matter the goal, though, the method is always the same. Do not feel empathy for what needs changing, whether that be for man or world. Everything is a resource to be utilized on the path to perfection, and it is our duty, not just to ourselves, but to our comrades to foster progress. For progress is power, and power is perfection. Hey friends, thanks for checking out my first installment of the Slicing the Pie series. I'll first expand on the bridge color, and then talk about how it pairs up with each of its neighboring colors. After that, we must take a look at what mana is missing from this shard, and what that tells us about it. From there, we can come up with 3 different ways of translating the philosophies within that shard. Okay, with that, let's get into it by asking, what is red, and how does it transform when paired with each of its neighbors? Red is honestly one of the simplest colors to explain, and I think that's just the way red would have it. For red, nothing really has to be as complicated as people make it out to be. It's as simple as being guided by your inner self. It's trusting your gut. It's instinct above introspection. Above all else, it's the passion to follow your heart, no matter where that may lead. You see, if you attach yourself to red, you'd best be ready to live your life guided purely by your emotions. So then, what does this look like when combined with green? And what philosophies lie within this pair? Well, what we see is that red brings out the side of green that embraces its total animal side. It transforms into a philosophy that foregoes everything except for pure instinct and freedom. When combined with red, green sheds its ideals of tradition and instead finds harmony in the laws of nature. On the other side of red's pairings, we have something not so dissimilar in red-black. The difference between these two pairings, in my opinion, is that this version is more the human side of such a combination. What I mean is that red-black doesn't follow animal instincts of hunter and prey like red-green. Instead, it becomes more twisted with the desires of humanity's darkest impulses. Black is always looking to take on the full extent of its existence and gains power so that it is never restricted. So when red is brought into the mix, this combination will go about black's selfish needs with added ferocity. The commonality here with both of these pairs lies in the idea of freedom being the key factor that red injects into each of these colors. Both black and green see the value in freedom, it's just pushed to the surface when red is fused with either of them. So now we understand that Jund is a color combination that values individual freedom above all else, and is willing, if not cruel, in its path to achieve this. You see, Jund knows that it must possess the vicious and callous nature of a predator to get the most out of its life. Now, before we can really understand a shard or wedge, it is best to also look at what the missing mana tells us about it, as what a shard is not is just as important as what it is. In the case of Jund, our missing mana is white and blue. So, with a lack of any white mana, we know for sure that Jund lacks empathy for those below it, and thinks that rigid social structures has no place in the world. Simple enough. But what does the lack of blue mana tell us? Well, this lets us know that Jund does not think about the deeper meaning behind itself or the world around it. I would say that with blue mana missing, Jund is not looking too far into the future. It is simply acting, following one instinct to the next. So with everything we know so far, we now have managed to craft the framework for understanding Jund. From this position, we can now talk about 3 possible philosophies for this shard. But remember, there's always more to be discovered about the colors than just what we've been shown before. Color philosophy is all about leaning more or less into different parts of the color's ideals. So if you have any alternative ideas for how you see Jund, then write those down in the comments. I'd love to read them and start a discussion. Okay, let's get on with it. The first point, and one I think is at the core of Jund's every decision, is the concept of authenticity of self through savage expression. It not only dictates that we follow our heart, but that it must be the animal side of ourselves, the side with no empathy, the side that acts impulsively and aggressively. Red tells us to trust our instincts. Green says that those instincts must be rooted in animal impulses, and black states that those impulses must only serve us, with no thought for others. Jund says that inside every one of us there is the hidden capacity for animal brutality. It's just that our cushy lives have pushed that aspect of ourselves further and further down. To Jund, we must express ourselves through vicious acts, for that is our original nature. It is, in Jund's mind, our truest form. To this end, Jund is the color combination that not only finds purpose in expressing its raw aggression, but also gains satisfaction in the act of consuming the weak, as if displaying its strength over others is a key to understanding its true self and its place in this world. For if I'm not able to aggressively pursue my raw instincts, then what purpose is there in my life, other than being a victim? For if you're not a predator, then you are a prey. Because of this, there is no middle ground or room for pacifism in Jund. It must always display its raw power in order to prove the worth of its existence. Within the philosophy of Jund, we know that there is no room for deeper introspection. Therefore, any philosophies that fall within Jund must also adhere to the ideal that I call chaos of thought and confidence of action. This means that those who follow Jund live a life of mental chaos, but in the end, believe themselves to be the only ones confident in their actions. Only through living our lives with no thought as to why we're doing something may we truly be who we were meant to be. Jund says that so much is wasted in introspection. We must remove the layers of thinking that slow our impulses and taint our actions. Think of it as a barrier that slows your actions due to time spent evaluating thought. If we remove that barrier, we may then act quickly and be closer to our truer self. Now, this doesn't just mean blocking the thought process that limit instinct. Part of it is also a complete lack of conscience, a conscience that would limit one's actions. Jund is following through on any impulse, no matter how brutal or depraved it may be. Red is swept away by its emotions, never letting deeper thought come into play. Green taps into its animal brain, which lacks empathy, and black is consumed by what it desires. So when we bring all of this together, we of course create a philosophy that is not compelled by thought, but by the chaos of the heart, gut, and soul. A combination that is confident in what it is and what it wants. The dragon has no pretense of compassion, no false mask of civilization, just hunger, heat, and need. So far, it may seem like Jund is a philosophy with absolutely no structure, and while this isn't too far from the truth, it is important to keep in mind that Green is still part of Jund, and Green believes that there must be harmony, but not necessarily peace. Harmony through domination means that creatures of the natural world will position themselves properly given enough time, due to the natural roles of predator and prey. What this means is that a structure is formed through domination and not law. Even though this harmony is formed through brutality, it is still harmony nonetheless. This structure may not look anything like the rigidity of White and Blue's idea of society, but it is a kind of structure. The best place to look for an example of this idea is in the natural world itself. Here, we see how nature and instinct can create structure and even harmony. In simplest terms, this ideal is derivative of another term here on Earth, the food chain. It's a concept that orders every ecosystem into a hierarchy of predator and prey, and in doing so, maintains a delicate ecosystem. Sure, some may strike against those above them when the opportunity presents itself, but the order of power is never shifting. So in this way, Jund still has leaders, but these leaders are not elected, nor does it have anything to do with their policies. It's just a matter of domination through raw power. So in a way, the use of aggression to dominate others creates an odd sense of harmony only truly displayed in Jund. So we know for sure that Jund is a color combination that can only be its authentic self through its expression of its every savage impulse. Not just to act on its instincts, but to truly display its aggression on others. Because of this, Jund lives its life in what others would call chaos of thought, in that it never thinks. It just acts out its every human and animal impulse. For in spending time wondering why you act, you miss out on the act itself. It's in this way of life that any version of Jund will find itself either at the top of the food chain or a victim to something stronger. The philosophy of Jund is one that is confident in its every action, and one where domination is the only law. Hey there friends, and thanks for checking out my latest color philosophy video. I honestly have... In this case, the bridge color is white. From there, we can talk about how that bridge interacts with each of its neighbors. From there, we have to talk about the colors that are missing from the equation, as what colors are missing in a shard is just as important as the colors that are within. So let's start things off with Bant's bridge color, white. The main thing to keep in mind when trying to understand white is that it is the color whose main focus is peace for all. The issue is that it knows there are those that don't share its ideals, and so uses strict levels of order and morality to achieve this goal. White is the color that will look to laws and religion to regulate our wilder sides, all in an effort to ensure peace and order for all. So any version of Bant will have a focus on community and social structure. When that bridge color is brought together with a color like green, who has a similar focus on community, that ideal is shifted towards acceptance rather than control. With green on board, white learns that it cannot change our nature, and if we're all to get along, we must be willing to accept each other's flaws. Now, with blue, it takes a different approach, instead leaning much more heavily into the mechanisms that enact order. It believes that the only way to create a perfect society is to create an environment where everyone can reach their potential. To do this, it may take structures of learning or laws to keep chaos at bay, but all of this must be willing to evolve. Okay, I think we're getting somewhere with this, but there's still an important aspect that needs addressing, and that is the colors that are missing from the shard. Let's first think about what a world or philosophy would be like with no black mana. For one, we remove selfishness from the equation. With no black mana present, we can be certain that Bant is a color always thinking about the effects it has on those around it. Alright, now how about we take red from this and see what we're left with? In the case of Bant, the lack of red mana tells us that this is a shard that respects the rule of law and is willing to restrict itself for the betterment of others. There are rules, and the rules supersede impulses. Now that we've created the framework, we can build the shard's philosophy. But before we do, I always like to say one thing. Color philosophy is by no means an exact science, and while on this channel we aim to further expand upon it, there are many sides to every color, and especially of every combination. Wizards of the Coast has laid out for us an interesting set of colors, and it's up to us to explore their potential. So if there is a version or ideal of Bant that I do not cover, then be sure to let me know in the comments, or join the discussion on my Discord. Okay, with that, let's get into my first point, and one that I feel is a great basis for understanding Bant. I always like to start things off with the most low-hanging fruit, so to speak, and bring up the concept that is a good basis for any philosophies that lie within the shard we're discussing. With Bant, I believe that concept is progression in order through tradition. What I mean by this is that Bant believes that if we all were to mold ourselves around proven rituals, we could then all march to the same beat, and thus march forward together. It takes green's predilection to maintaining the old ways, or traditions, white's need for order, and blue's desire to move things ever forward. Typically, the blue side may not be so inclined to follow along with the old, and would rather seek out the new, but when combined with white and green, it can see the value in rallying around something, and from everyone's progress as a unit. What is important to note is that Bant is not stagnant because of tradition, as traditions can be iterated on. Instead, it's a slow and methodical march forward together. A reliance on an established order also creates roles, and by these roles, you're handed your purpose. In this way, a perfect functioning version of Bant would be similar to an ant colony. Everyone would have their place and know their role within the established tradition and rules, and from there, they could act accordingly, instead of creating the friction that individuality brings forth. An ant colony is close to a perfect example, but I think that Bant, no matter the form, is always looking to accept others, and wouldn't be so tribal. Because at the end of the day, Bant will always be the most diverse and welcoming of all shards. Traditions can be taught, and through this action, outsiders are made to become a part of the collective. And then, through those repetitive rituals, we can begin to march to the same beat. With that established, I want to move on to the next point, one that allows the growth to happen and leans a little more into Bant's blue side. Evolution through acceptance and peace is a philosophy of Bant that believes we can only move forward as a society when we can work together. If we take our own existence as an example, humanity's greatest weakness, and potentially our extinction, is our inability to treat each other as equals. What I'm saying is that our divisiveness will be our downfall. And what Bant believes is that in a world where all are one, we can become better as a whole. Blue believes that we must always be looking to become a better version of ourselves. White believes that our strength lies within each other. And green believes we all have a part to play. Therefore, perfect society to Bant would be one where the entire plane is banded together, and one where war is nothing more than a passing thought, and chaos is nothing more than a concept. In this ideal world, Bant could create an environment where learning and expansion of thought, society, and culture could take precedence. In this way, Bant could accomplish the cultivation of both nature and nurture, and in essence, reach a new plateau of evolution. The interesting thing about this concept is that it wouldn't take place in a single tightly knit city as you first might picture, but instead could be sprawled across the whole plane. Imagine a web of small villages sprawled across the plane, none of which have to spend resources on war with each other. Instead, they could build up their own expertise and share freely. In this world, you would have networks of diverse thinkers, artists, and builders, all of whom could devote themselves to their specialty. Okay, let's move on to the final point, and another broad philosophy important to Bant: religion. I would say another important piece of Bant's framework is the concept of acceptance through piety. Where traditions give a guiding focus that can bring about natural order, I think religion is the catalyst for acceptance when it comes to Bant. Of course, this might not be present in every version, but as you will see, it can appear quite naturally because of the colors present. Let's break it down first. In green, we see a color that knows there is a greater force behind everything. Some might call her Mother Nature itself. White, of course, is the color most drawn to worship and fellowship, and blue is curious as to the deeper meaning behind things. All of this combined can easily culminate into a religion. Now, it's not enough for the colors to come together in this way. The real question is, why is it important to Bant's identity? Well, I think it comes down to the way it can bring people together that Bant finds not only useful, but important. It isn't doing it for its own gain or to manipulate, but it earnestly believes what it preaches and accepts others into its guiding ideals. The specifics of the religion aren't important as they change from plane to plane. It's more about their willingness to accept a power beyond what they understand than to use it as a way that brings people together. There is a pureness to it that I don't think we have seen yet here on Earth. It honestly seems to be one that only an idealist color philosophy could create. What we've learned is that in the end, Bant wants to create a world where all are one, a unified philosophy dictating that all must be accepted so that we may march forward together. To do this, it may rely on things like tradition to create the ideals that unify us, or perhaps it's in a common belief that we may share a bond through piety. Once we have achieved this, we can then craft a world of peace, one that will allow us to concentrate on bettering not just ourselves, but those around us. To some, this may seem like a philosophy of an idealist, but to Bant, no philosophy is worth considering if it's not ideal for all. Well, thanks for checking out my latest Slicing the Pie episode. Each of the 5 shards is a grouping of 3 colors, with 1 color in the middle, surrounded by its allies. We call this the bridge color. This color gives the shard its focus and binds its 2 allies together. In the case of Grixis, that color is black. As we have learned from previous videos, we know that black is the color most concerned with the self, and of what it can get out of its existence. Black knows that there is no one else looking out for you but yourself, and that it's up to you to take what you want from this life. Nothing is off limits to those who live by this ideal. With that covered, we must now move on to the second step, and that is figuring out how the bridge interacts with each of its neighbors. This way, we can begin to glean core aspects of Grixis philosophy. Let's start off with the combination of red and black. This pairing is one that allows itself to fulfill black's desires with a focus and fervor only brought about by red. There's no question to red-black as to the purpose to life. It takes what it wishes and does as it pleases, never stopping to question its actions. These desires may often be rooted in sadistic human impulses, but not always. It's important to note that red can love, and that red can have empathy. It's just that black makes sure that there's always something in it for itself. On the other side of it, we have black and blue, a pairing that takes life a bit more seriously. This pair believes that to get what we want and to be in a place of perfection, we must take deliberate steps through control and subterfuge to position ourselves in a place where we make the rules and shape the world around us. A world where our power and knowledge is absolute. So, with both of those pairs explained, we can begin to see that Grixis is a combination that is focused on what it can get out of life. It sees its desires as objectives to be fulfilled, no matter the means. It may take a direct and short-term approach, or it can plan and plot its way into a position of absolute power. It's all a matter of leaning more or less into different aspects of the colors present. But with black as its bridge, it will always make decisions that will better itself, or at least what it deems important. With what we've uncovered so far, we can begin to see what a philosophy of Grixis could potentially be, but our framework is not complete. To get the whole picture, we still have to move on to the final step, which is to select the 2 colors that are missing in order to learn what the shard is not. Because what a shard is not, or cannot be, tells us a lot about Grixis. First up, let's cover white, because I think its absence will really give us a perspective on Grixis that is very important. White is the color whose actions are always concerned with how it affects others. At a macro level, it shapes society in a way that it sees as improvement, and at a micro level, it is the color that will go out of its way to change the lives of people for what it deems to be the better. What this tells us in the end, and especially with a focus on black, is that Grixis is a combination whose decisions are always rooted in the self. It will only act in regard to others based on how it is affected, and if that effect benefits them in any way. Next, we have a complete lack of green mana in Grixis, and the result is something very similar. With no green mana present, we can now see that Grixis is in no way concerned with how things should be. What I mean is that Grixis will never make decisions based on the natural order. It will bite above the food chain, it will consume without thought, and it will pervert whatever it feels it needs to. In the end, the real thing we glean from these colors being devoid in Grixis is that we have a combination that only acts in accordance to self, sometimes actively doing harm to others for gain or simply for pleasure. Well, there we have it, the basis or framework that will allow us to build our philosophy for Grixis. For this video, I'll cover what I feel are the Shard's 3 core ideas, but as I've said before, it won't be the whole picture, as there is always more to be discussed and discovered when it comes to color philosophy and magic. So with that out of the way, let's cover the first tenet of Grixis ideals. Unbridled ambition through control is a core tenet of Grixis philosophy, as it perfectly encapsulates what is at the basis of a lot of its decisions. What I mean is that Grixis is an obsessive combination that is never satisfied with what it has, and is always looking to what others possess, thinking only of what it can take. Grixis sees lives and possessions as something that is merely not theirs yet. It is greed and envy in the strongest sense of the word. What's more is that it knows that in order to wrest from others what they hold dear, a crushing level of control must be created and maintained. Through fear and manipulation, Grixis may take what it covets from others. In red, we have obsessive tendencies. In black, we see a ruthless greed, and in blue, there's the manipulation of its surroundings, all culminating into greed and envy disguised as ambition. When it comes to a shard like Grixis, it will consume life, knowledge, and possessions until there is naught but dust, and still it will look to other places for what it desires. It is hunger for power beyond what we can imagine. Now, the need is not the whole picture, for to simply want is not enough to bring about results. To gain what Grixis desires, it must use what it has at its disposal to gain control over others, and in turn, use them to gain ever more influence, control, and power. To extend yourself beyond your limitations, you must exert yourself onto others, and in turn, those you have gained influence over may spread your tendrils of control even further. Think of a cult leader on a small scale, or a multiverse-spanning threat like Nicol Bolas. All must bow or die. You are either their god or their devil, and it is their choice, and there is no in-between. Okay, now let's move away from what I would call peak villainy into something a bit more grounded in real-world thought. To say Grixis is only world-consuming dark plots wouldn't be giving it enough credit, as there is a side of its ideals that we can find in our own world. This aspect of Grixis philosophy is based in its creative side, an artist's mind if you will, and it's one I want to highlight in this video. That way you can get a better perspective of the facets that make up this shard. I call this side of Grixis philosophy self-indulgent creativity. It is a side of Grixis that wishes to create instead of destroy or consume. Now, of course, as we discussed earlier, this is a black-focused shard, with a lack of white or green mana, and therefore every aspect of its creativity only serves to fulfill its ego or desire. This manifests itself in a few ways, but I think the most obvious is the egotistical artist. This side of Grixis pulls heavily from the combination of red and blue, who together have an insatiable need to experiment and create, with black's requirement to be the focus of every decision it makes. Think for a moment of the creative who spends more time waiting for a compliment than working at their craft. They obsess over the image people have of them in their head, and use their creative ability to achieve fame or greatness. It's more a result of the ego than a need to create something that others may enjoy. Perhaps they don't even create something that is necessarily enjoyed, as long as its creation or art is on everyone's lips. It's legacy over content. Of course, every creative action is done so that others may witness it, but to Grixis, the result is worth more than the action. It is creativity only for fame and fortune, not to create in order to better others. Alright, now let's cover one more primary aspect of Grixis ideals. When thinking of what a world populated by those who have lived within the philosophy of Grixis would be, I think it's best to understand what structures it would find most important. It's not just a matter of constant ambition, desire, and control, as those are an end goal or a motivation. No, what I want to answer with this tenet is, what is the type of action a soul who is wrapped up in this philosophy would take? What sort of mind would you be working with? And what interests would be important to that mind? It is with this question in mind where I came up with the concept of revelry in cruel magic. What this means is that a Grixis mage, which I think would be quite common considering blue is part of the equation, would be one who would seek out magic that accompanies its mindset. This, of course, would manifest itself in magic that's rooted in death, malice, and hate. Not just ways of control, but ways to punish and to merely draw satisfaction through exertion of its magic. Think for a moment of the magic that would be created with blue's need for constant iteration and perfection, combined with black's ruthless and amoral outlook, with the impulsive and emotional side of red. We naturally see this in the combination red-black, an almost cruel obsession with pain and the human experience. So, if we combine that with the magic focus of blue, it's no surprise that we can find ourselves in a place where suffering and magic go hand in hand. Of course, this magic isn't just a matter of causing pain, but it is one that is always looking to take every aspect of humanity and stretch it as far as it can go. It is bringing death into life, pain into pleasure, and trust into fear. It's with these tools that Grixis may exact its control and fulfill its ambition. When it comes down to it, I believe what lies at the core of Grixis is the human experience brought to its most extreme conclusion. It's the obsession and emotion of red, the curiosity of blue, and the fully idealized version of self that black brings with it. This all manifests itself into traits such as ambition, envy, and pride. To some, these qualities may be reviled, but to Grixis, it's a matter of being honest with oneself. It's allowing yourself to enjoy the full extent of your being and really being honest with your feelings. And it is them who pity you for restricting what comes natural. For if you are not exacting the entire extent of your existence, then what is the purpose of that existence? Wow, I can't believe we finally have covered Grixis. Thanks for the patience. In the case of Naya, our three colors are red, green, and white, making our bridge color green. This bridge color has the task of bringing two enemy colors together, creating a, bridge that allows the others to find common ground. So, what do we know about green? Well, green believes that we're all born with a role in this world, and by fulfilling our role, we may be in harmony with all things. This is to say that everything has a function, and by respecting that function, we may all gain what we need from the ecosystems we find ourselves in. This tells us that Naya's focus will always be a matter of the bigger picture and how it fits within the world around it, and that nothing is out of place and everything belongs. Now that we've established the bridge, it's time to apply the bridge's philosophy to each of its neighbors, as this will begin to expand what Naya can be. First up, we have the combination of red-green. Here, we have a pair that brings red's impulses and green's instincts into a philosophy that is the epitome of freedom of self and expression of the soul. Red-green perhaps is the most confident in itself, as it is driven not by the mind, but by the heart and gut. Then, on the other side, we have the pair white-green, a combination whose primary focus is the acceptance of what makes us who we are. And through that acceptance, we may all coexist in a habitat where our nature may thrive. What these combinations together tell us is that Naya will be a shard who needs freedom to thrive, and that freedom must be extended to all through acceptance and coexistence. As you can probably see, the shard of Naya is beginning to take shape, but we still have not crafted the whole framework. To do that, we must look at the final step, which is to extrapolate what we can from the mana that is missing from this shard, which are the enemies of our bridge. In the case of Naya, that is black and blue. Let's start with black. What we know of black is that it's the color of self, and of the drive to do things that bring yourself the power to enact your will. So, with a lack of black mana, we know that Naya is a shard of community, or at least harmony. Naya knows its place, and isn't about to take on more than it needs. Next, we have a lack of blue mana. Blue is the color of discovery and improvement in all things, both internal and external. So, of course, with no blue mana present, Naya is a shard that isn't looking to change or discover more about itself. It's confident in its actions and who it is. There we have it. The framework is built, and I think we have a good starting point for this and future discussions. For, as I like to say, there's always more to discuss and discover when it comes to Magic the Gathering color philosophy. So if you have an idea of Naya in mind, or any tweaks to the ideas that I bring up today, then be sure to let me know in the comments. Okay, with that, let's get into our first tenet of Naya color philosophy. One that is at its core, an ideal that should always be in your mind when thinking of Naya, and that is, simply put, balance. This concept is one that I only think could be possible with a bridge like green, holding it all together. Sure, we can see balance in any pairing, but when it comes to Naya, there's this undeniable sense of harmony and balance only seen as perfectly as it is in Naya. You see, no color is more neutral than green. It does not fight against anything, it doesn't try to change anything, it simply just is. With this in mind, we can then look to its neighbors, white and red, or order and chaos. Naya sees how there are two forces pulling against each other, and says instead of allowing one to take over, what if we accept this dichotomy and allow it to govern us? What I mean by this is that order does not always mean restraint. It can be found in allowing the uncontrollable to happen, all with a mindset that is rooted in acceptance instead of resistance. We cannot remove the beast from the man, nor the man from the beast. We are both animal and something more. And to fight against this dichotomy within us all would be rejecting who we really are. Now, this does not in any way equate to chaotic action for its own sake, merely accepting things that are not in our control. And by doing this, we can live a more balanced life. For if we are to concentrate on ourselves and fulfill not just our duties, but fulfill our heart's desires, we may live a more full life. And in that, we may find balance and structure. White on its own might say our impulses will lead us down the wrong path, and red will tell you that order breeds out our humanity. But green says that each are both right and wrong. Yes, allowing ourselves to be swept away by our impulses will lead to chaos, and then of course a rigid society goes against our animal nature, but is there no middle ground? Why can we not recognize that we are animals deep down, and there are aspects that we must not deny ourselves? But at the same time, we must be conscious of how our actions affect others. For if they're not able to express themselves, then we run the risk of creating a world where we either are paralyzed by fear or driven by selfish action. To Naya, it's all a matter of balancing the two sides of us to make something that is more whole and better for it. Imagine a world where we have the space to act out our animal needs and yet felt safe in doing so. A world where structures helped those at the bottom, but did not stifle harmony. Now, let's move on to the next point, and one that sort of piggybacks off the one we just covered, and that is, freedom through coexistence is a concept based in the idea that the only way for us all to be truly free is to learn to coexist. Naya knows that there are vast differences that separate us, but says it's in those differences we may find a new meaning to life. You see, we may all look, sound, and act different, but in the end, we're all human, or Leonin, Elven, well, you get the idea. You see, green tells us that we're all made for a reason, and our existence has meaning. White says that we must accept those who feel like they're on the outside. And finally, red holds it all together with the love and passion that only red could bring. If we expand this further, it becomes more than just accepting what makes us different from each other. There is a reason for it, one that may seem obvious, but also never really is put into practice. If we can accept each other for who we are, we may then free up space in our own minds. Space which was once used to house the anxiety of how others perceived us. Naya says that if we follow this ideal and accept the eccentricities that make us individuals, we then don't need to worry about how others perceive us, if they do the same. In this way, we may then feel a true freedom that I think most never experience. It's that freedom to be the person you really want to be, and deep down, who you really are. A side of ourselves we fail to express because of pressures from society and fear of judgment. We know now in our own modern time that there are people who are pushed aside into the shadows because of their sexual orientation, their beliefs, or simply just how they wish to dress. Naya says no. No one should ever feel that way. And by pushing others away because of their differences, we are then limiting our own freedom to express ourselves and feel accepted. Try to imagine who you really are, and how the fear of judgment has limited your life. Now, of course, I don't want you to think that Naya is all just peace and acceptance, for of course there is a side of Naya that will not sit idly by. Let's move on to the third concept. The concept of nature's retribution is the side of Naya that explains its sense of justice when it comes to nature. I'm sure it isn't much of a surprise to you if you've been with me for a while, but green isn't just peace and harmony. It won't sit idly by while Mother Nature is being used and abused. Then let's take this a step further and think for a moment what sort of effect red and white have on this already inherent sense of duty to the natural world. In white, we see a color that stands up for those who cannot stand up for themselves. In red, there is passion, which adds a relentless quality to this ideal. So when we bring these two colors together, there's a sense of justice that is unparalleled by any other pairing. Then, after we add our bridge to this pair, green, it gives this sense of justice a focus. What we have then is a shard that will go to extreme lengths to defend its plane and its vulnerable inhabitants from overconsumption and abuse. In the multiverse, this has many forms, but the one I always imagine first is that of a bestial deity which enacts the rage of the animal kingdom, all in order to defend against those who would abuse its kin and its home. On the plane of Earth, this entity would be closer to activists who protest the building of pipelines or interfere with the whaling industry, among other acts of defiance. It's an anger that comes from the realization that there are those who would rather consume until there is nothing left from a world that cannot defend itself, only to sit on their cash while the world burns. To this end, Naya has no patience and will do whatever it can to help which cannot help itself, and is more than willing to take the fight to those who would do the plain harm. In the end, what we've learned about Naya always comes back to one word: balance. It may fight for the Earth's means of maintaining balance, or it may come in a way that is direct through accepting what lies at the core of our being. Naya will tell us that by simply placing our animal and human sides in equal measure within us, we can find a balance of soul and mind. Or we might find balance in the freedom to be who we are and accept who others are as well. For if we can all find something about ourselves to love, and in turn love others, then maybe we can all experience the balance and freedom that true acceptance can offer. We did it! That's all 5 shards of magic. Now, don't worry, I will... Because of their composition, wedges are, well, intrinsically different than shards. So it becomes a matter of necessity to change the framework of our discussion to better suit those wedges. What I mean is that I'll be tackling the next 5 videos a little bit differently than the last 5, at least in its initial setup. The new framework will be built in 3 steps. First, we'll begin by discussing the pairing of allied colors that make up the wedge. This is because within the wedge we have 2 colors that already find common ground, and because of this, they'll have the strongest influence over what the wedge is. I think of it this way. You have a group of 3 people, 2 of which seem to agree on most things, while the third, in this case the enemy color, just doesn't seem to agree with either of their decisions. In the end, the enemy color will have influence over the group, but it will always have trouble being the focal point of any philosophy. Even if it's the color we're leaning into, green-white's presence will always be strongly felt. In the case of Abzan, our 3 colors are white, black, and green, with green and white being the allied pairing. So I think it's important that we dive into the pair of green-white and see what sort of philosophy comes when these two colors are brought together. The pair green-white is the combination of peace and unity through acceptance. It takes green's core ideal, which states, we're all just small, imperfect pieces of one whole perfect ecosystem, and then combines it with white's need for peace through order, thus creating a philosophy which aims to craft a society where all can find their place, and no one is an outsider. It is a combination that sees the value in both total acceptance of our nature and the structures that hold it all together. Now that we've established our pairing, I would like to move on to the second step by bringing in the outsider, the color that is the enemy of the pair we just discussed. In the case of Abzan, that color is black. This does make things a bit tricky, but at the same time is a great practice in understanding color philosophy. So what is black? Black is the color that follows its ambition to its final conclusion. It sees strength in itself and rejects anything that goes against its best interest. To some, it may seem selfish. To black, it's prosperity of self. In the context of Abzan, this self-interest is widened a bit due to the presence of green and white. In the end, it tells us that Abzan isn't concerned with the betterment of all through acceptance, but instead prosperity of the group it finds itself within. Okay, let's move on to the final step, which is one that is shared by the shards, and that is picking out the two colors that are not present in the wedge and figuring out what their absence tells us about the wedge we're discussing. In the case of Abzan, those colors are blue and red. So let's break them down and see what it tells us. Blue is the color of learning, discovery, and self-improvement. So without any blue present, it tells us that Abzan finds strength in traditions and in keeping with the old ways, making only slow changes to its way of thinking. Next up, we have red, the color of passion, emotion, and impulse. With the lack of red mana, we know that Abzan will not make decisions based on its heart, but rather proven paths, which makes its ideals come off as cold and at times heartless. Alright, there we have it, the framework for the discussion of the wedge of Abzan. This time around, I just want to give a special shout out to the community over on the DiceTry Discord. It's just such an awesome and ever-growing community. So if you would like to be part of the discussion, then be sure to join up. I'll have a link in the description. Alright, with that out of the way, let's dive into the first, and I would say primary ideal of Abzan in most people's minds, and that is unity in tribalism. It's what happens when you take green-white's perspective on community and twist it in a way that is influenced by black, resulting in a philosophy of us versus them. Now, it isn't abandoning the idea of community-driven prosperity, but instead is saying that it's just the group you belong to that deserves to prosper. This, of course, makes it so that anyone outside of the group is lesser or an antagonist. Abzan sees all that it has created as an already perfect ecosystem, and one that it wishes to keep safe at all costs. Now, this doesn't mean it's not willing to bring others in, it's just that in doing so, you must prove an unwavering loyalty no matter the cost. You see, Abzan does not have an ounce of patience for those who would deteriorate what they have built. It's a philosophy bred from a survival mindset, and to that end, is very successful. It takes green's fervent protection of its own ecosystem, white's sense of order and duty, and black's focus on what is good for the self. Now, this is not to say that Abzan does not have sights for wider swaths of control. No, quite the opposite. Unity in tribalism doesn't solely mean that Abzan is focused on simply keeping what it has safe. It's still looking outward to other peoples and other lands. To Abzan, it's simply not enough to keep your own kin in a structure of prosperity. You must always pursue the true ideal, and that is placing all under the shade of your banner. To this end, Abzan will use its large and varied military force full of devout soldiers to spread its influence as far as it can, all the while enveloping others into its society. What becomes of these new additions to Abzan, you may ask? Well, even though green-white is willing to bring others into the fold, all in order to find harmony through unity, Abzan still sees those who belong to its core group as special. Abzan will always take in other people, of course, but those people usually will find themselves as lesser citizens. Sure, they may often enjoy the structures of peace that Abzan provides, but they are still considered lesser than. I believe it is here where we see a true face of Abzan philosophy, one that takes acceptance through order and asks, what more can this be? Now, I don't like to always paint things in a dark light, so let's look at this from a perspective that allows us to see its value. As a society, it may seem that Abzan is harsh, and to those outside of its core people, it may be. But think for a second how powerful of an idea this is. Abzan is the philosophy of conquerors, of great nations. I think of Rome, which had a diverse population because of its vast expansionist ideals. It was a vast nation that saw a time of great prosperity, even if some suffered under its rule. Abzan sees its way of thinking as practical, and in the end, better for all those who fall under its rule, whether they like it or not. Okay, now I think it's time to take a look at another way of seeing the combination of green, white, and black, one that reflects a better understanding of life and death. The tenet I will cover next is one that I actually touched on in my green-black video, and that is an idea I call oneness with the cycle. I do believe that pairs are a great way of finding a variety of interesting philosophies, but here we have an example of why three-color philosophies can make a concept more complex and yet refined. What I'm talking about here is what happens when we take green-black's view on death and then build upon it by bringing white into the fold. This cycle, which focused more on death initially, now becomes a perfect circle. So what does this all mean? Well, Abzan is the wedge that sees the whole picture of life and death in equal parts. White represents life and light, green as the affected plane of existence, and black as death and darkness itself. Abzan states that it is through the acceptance of the whole picture that we may find true understanding of our place and how our actions affect it. Physically and spiritually, we see this represented perfectly with the three colors present. White represents the realms of life, light, and of the heavens. Green is the natural plane, the basis for all things. And then finally, we have black, which takes on the role of death, darkness, and of what one might call hell itself. If we can accept the circle as continuous, we can then find peace in our own existence. There's no longer a fear of death or a wish for something better beyond our own life, because to Abzan, it's all one equal picture. An Abzan philosophy might then believe in ideals of reincarnation or of a second life found in death. Perhaps it will tell us of how the forms beyond our material plane is the state in which we will find true harmony. Think for a moment of what is bred from the lack of understanding in why we're here, and to what ends are the meaning of life and death. Think of how many conflicting religions or anxieties spring forth from this lack of knowing. Abzan states that this is a foolish endeavor, and if we could simply just see the cycle for what it is, we would finally be one with ourselves and everything around us. I think it's finally time that we talk about how Abzan could apply to our own lives with a concept I call inner peace through structured self. I believe that Abzan is a combination that is able to achieve inner peace through routines, which benefit it by creating structures in its own life. In this way, Abzan is able to fulfill its daily needs, and from there, it may achieve its ambitions. Where others may look outward to find what they need, Abzan can find it within themselves, all by forming routines and values that facilitate balance within. Think about how each of the core ideals within each color can be applied to your own life. What you get is a philosophy that is more about structure, balance, and achieving your goals. In white, we have a color of order designed to facilitate peace. In green, there is a balance in all things. And in black, there are the actions taken to find satisfaction in self-preservation and prosperity. What this entails is that Abzan fashions routines and structures in its life in order to find satisfaction in the balancing of oneself. It may not be so great at bringing that peace to others, but it may weather any storm around it by finding peace in its routines and by allowing things out of its control to pass by. An Abzan person might be one who wakes up and meditates to find its calming center for the day, then works to achieve its goals, benefited by the rigid routines it has set up for itself. You see, by removing the fear of the greater forces that are out of your control, and by building up structures that bring about the means for you to achieve your goals, you'll find that your mind is able to achieve true wholeness, and from that state, your ambitions will be within reach. I think in a lot of ways, this version of Abzan is better off alone, and can sometimes come off as an introvert. But this isn't always the case. It's more a matter of taking care of yourself first, and then applying it outward in a way that serves your goals. Abzan is an interesting case in that it has to reconcile ideas of acceptance and order, all while making sure those functions serve it. In this regard, black's influence forces green and white to ask themselves what's important to them. In some cases, this means taking care of your tribe first. Abzan believes that it's only in this way that peace can be cultivated. It is only from there that your ideas can then be extended to the rest of the plane, even if this transition happens by force. Don't worry, they'll thank you for it later. In other ways, it's the structure of white and balance of green applied to the self in a way that breeds inner peace. But from there, your ambitions may be achieved. Interestingly, though, the colors present may instead take on a wider concept and showcase themselves as all of known reality. It's in understanding our place within the cycle and how we're able to affect it that we may achieve a oneness that other colors may fall short of. Whatever the case, Abzan is the combination of the structured approach to harmony built to serve those important to you. For we cannot hope to shape the rest of the world if we cannot first find peace within ourselves. Hey, thanks for the patience on this one. Wedges are... In the case of Mardu, our three colors are white, red, and black, with white being the outsider, or enemy color. So what does the combination of red and black believe in? Well, in my original color pairing video that I made for this combination, I don't think I really did the pair justice, and I'm happy to have a chance to give it another go, even if the explanation will be brief. Red-black is the combination with the passion and fervor to follow its desires and ambitions to their final conclusions. While this can lead to sadistic desire fulfillment, this isn't always the case. In reality, it's usually an unflinching focus on what is important to red-black. Sure, at times it can translate into things as simple as carnal desire, but it can also be world-changing ambition. It can be an obsessive love for someone, or wearing your hopes and desires on your sleeves. It's still a combination that will always be focused on how things or people affect it, or how it may affect others, but if something is important to red-black, there's nothing it won't do to follow through on it. Now that we have that covered, it's time to ask what the enemy color brings to the table, and how its beliefs will influence the wedge. In the case of Mardu, our outlying color is white. So what do we know of white then? Well, with a heavy focus on the beings who inhabit its plane, it is the color that desires peace above all else, and wants to create a world where all get what they need. The issue is that what white wants and what others want don't always line up, and even if its intentions are well-meaning, it can creep into fascism. Like all color philosophy though, it is a spectrum. On one end, white is peace and love, while on the other end, it's law and order. So far, we can begin to see what is being built here. Ideals that are rooted in unflinching conviction based around ambition and desire. While this is a great foundation, we're still not done with our framework. To do that, we'll have to talk about the colors that are missing and what their absence tells us about Mardu. In the case of Mardu, our two absent colors are blue and green. Let's first tackle blue, the color of knowledge and introspection. With no blue mana, we know that Mardu can be swept away by its emotions and ideals, ones based on its feelings. Concepts like self-expression or pleasure hold more of an importance than self-improvement or discovery. Next, we have a lack of green mana. Green is the color that wants to keep things as they are, in their already perfect state. With no green mana, we know that Mardu is all too willing to change and use up whatever it wishes, with no regard for how things should or shouldn't be. Alright, that's it, the basis, or framework for our discussion. From here, I will represent three philosophies which I believe are three major faces of Mardu. If you have any other ideas as to what Mardu believes in, or more to add to the ideas I present, then be sure to let me know in the comments, as I read every single one. Also, if it's your first time here and you did enjoy the video, then be sure to subscribe, as we'll be covering more color philosophy in the future. Okay, with that, let's dive into the first Mardu philosophy, and that is truth in martial expression. This ideal is based in a sort of warrior code, and while it may not directly apply to our own lives, it's nonetheless a core ideal when applying Mardu to fantasy worlds or historic figures. What Mardu values with this ideal is to carry itself in a manner that allows it to express itself in a way that values individual power, all in order to strengthen the group. It's an ideal that takes the saying of, the group is only as strong as the weakest link, and demands that those within the chain strive to be the strongest link. This demand is more than just an empty motto. It is held as the highest code one could aim for in a Mardu society. It is the individual's ability to express their strength in a way that benefits all who fall within that society. In a lot of ways, I think the best parallel would be the Spartans of history. Here we have individuals who valued raw power and ability above all else, but because of this, created one of the strongest fighting forces of its time. It takes Black's strive for power, Red's relentless nature, and then brings it all in with White's focus on discipline and concern for the group. It's easy to see how Mardu could rise above some of the other color combinations in its martial prowess. That said, it's not a very forgiving philosophy. Sure, White stands on the outside asking for equality and kindness, but it's downplayed by Red and Black's demand for proof of strength, a reason to exist. This mentality lifts up the strong and breeds heroes, but has no time for the weak. It may not outright kill or exile those who are weak, but it will not spend any time caring for them. Anyone who stumbles, in Mardu's eyes, deserves to be left behind. I think this quote from Lycia sheds some light on what I'm talking about. I give my blood, my life, all I have in exchange for victory. In the eyes of this version of Mardu, victory is all that matters, and to achieve victory, there is no room for weakness. And so, the value of the individual's strength is of key importance. As always, I think the first philosophy is grabbing at the low-hanging fruit, as I believe this is what most people imagine when they think of Mardu. For our next one, I'd like to ask what would happen when White's devotion is aided by Red and Black, with a philosophy I call confidence in zealous action. What we have here is a potential philosophy that stands firm in an absolute devotion to the ideals that it holds. Ideals which are lofty enough for Mardu to demand that they be followed by all. It's when a strong sense of morality, however flawed it may be, is hyper-focused and followed through with an obsessive passion. This may all sound extreme, but let's break it down by color and you'll start to see what I mean. With White present, Mardu can hold a sort of perceived moral high ground, one that is bolstered by Black's self-confidence, which is ignited and obsessively carried out by red. As you can see, this is by no means a stretch once you break down the sources of each of the colors present in Mardu. So these are fine words to toss around, but what does this look like? Well, in a lot of ways, my first thought goes to zealous religious beliefs, ones that can take an extreme turn. This version of Mardu would base its morality on a higher power or doctrine. Now, I don't want to get too much into the logistics of it, but perhaps it's one that would allow for more carnal human expression, or it could be one of valor and strength. Whatever the case, the source of their doctrine or ideology isn't important, as it would change from plane to plane. What is important is how Mardu expresses itself through the religion or ideology. You see, here we have a very interesting set of colors that sort of whip each other up into a fanatical sort of frenzy. Let's bring it back to the colors to explain what I mean. Think about black and how it cares only for its own view of the world, and how it might want to push that view onto others. Then we have white, who by no means is a stranger to using martial force to uphold its ideals. And finally, we have red, who is more than happy to be swept away with its emotions, and would allow itself to fulfill the other's color's desires without question. In the end, we would have a dangerous combination that feels that it's the only one with the answers, and that it has a duty to bring those ideologies onto others. Without getting too much into it here on this channel, I'm sure you can think of plenty of examples all throughout human history of religious conversions at any cost. In a lot of ways, this version scares me the most, out of any of the philosophies that we've covered here so far. But as always, this is but one face of this philosophy, so let's end it on a positive note and cover just one more ideal, one that could potentially do away with our current way of viewing society, and that is peace in fulfilled desires. Here we have a way of thinking that aims to be better for all by being better for the individual. We spend so much of our life worrying, working, and fighting for our place that by the time we die, we question if we ever truly lived. And this version of Mardu is fed up with this way of thinking. Why can we not all know a good life? Why is it only reserved for a small few? An ideal society for this version of Mardu, then, would be a life well lived for all. One where we may all be free to fulfill our desires. But how do we get there? Well, Mardu states that we must create a world where we all put in equal work, and in doing so, all get equal reward. It simply believes that there should not be a world where a small percent flourish while the rest suffer. We should be more focused on what we want to get out of our own existence, rather than just scraping by. So how does Mardu come by this way of thinking? Well, let's break it down by color. You see, black's the color who demands self-fulfillment and enjoyment of life's pleasure. Then it adds the compassion and need for freedom of red, and finally combines it with white's desires for those aspects to be applied to all. Ultimately creating a world where we all work together, all in order to provide a fulfilling life for all. To accomplish this, Mardu would abolish all forms of state-run government, and instead put the power back into the people's hands, as even though white is all for law and order, it is willing to drop this facet of its ideals when in the presence of red and black, both of which value individual freedom. Instead, it would be a flexible society run by the people and for the people, with no room for the rigid structures that benefit those at the top. And all of this would have a focus on creating a world where everyone has the chance to live a full and satisfying life, with no fear of a few elites subjugating and oppressing the many. Whatever the final philosophy you do settle on with Mardu, it always seems extreme to our standard ways of seeing the world around us. And honestly, I don't think it could go any other way. Here we have a combination heavily influenced by red and black, colors who live their lives in the most extreme fashion, at least compared to any of the other colors. There can be no sitting on the sidelines or moderate ways of thinking with this pair. When white comes along, it merely adds a wider scope to their ideals, and in many ways makes those ideals more grandiose and inclusive to those who agree with them. In the end, Mardu is the combination that feels very strongly about what it believes, and is all too willing to fulfill the finality of those ideals. Whether it's a society of warriors bred stronger by individualism, a philosophy of religious fanaticism, or anarchist ideals that aim to tear down the shackles that bind us. Mardu is a passionate force for change, and you're either with them or you're against them. Wow, that ended up being a bit of a heavier episode than I was intending, but in the case of Jeskai, our three colors present are white, blue, and red, with blue and white being our allied pair. The reason that the allied pair is important is that when coming up with concepts within the wedge, we have two colors who are more closely aligned with each other, and in turn will more likely agree with each other. This isn't to say that red isn't a factor, it's just more of an outside influence. So let's start things off with expanding on what white and blue, when combined, believe in. White-blue is the combination that values the structures which accommodate the perfection of self and society. It sees the truest ideal as one that sets up not just yourself, but others for success, always looking on how these things can be improved. To do this, it creates an ever-evolving system of order, law, and infrastructure. At the same time, it is the color combination that values self-reflection in the pursuit of betterment through discipline. In simplest terms, blue-white is the combination of perfection through order. This tells us that Jeskai is a wedge always concerned with the improvement of not just oneself, but the world around it, all in an effort to bring about a better world because of it, a goal that always moves forward. Alright, with that covered, it's still important to talk about the outsider, or enemy color present within the wedge we are discussing, as this color will bring in influences that add nuance to this already established ideal. In the case of Jeskai, our enemy color is red. So, what does red believe? Well, it's not that red actively believes in anything. It would be the first to tell you that it simply just follows what its heart desires. It is the color that embodies every spectrum of the human emotion. It can be violent and aggressive, or it can be compassionate and loyal. When thinking of red, it's all a matter of impulse, for mindfulness leads to doubt, and doubt is the only wrong path. So then what does this mean in terms of Jeskai? Well, we all know that sometimes white and blue's decisions lack empathy. Sure, white wants to do what's right, but it hardly asks what's right for each individual. With red along, Jeskai is very aware of its humanity. It must always grapple with its impulses, all while maintaining its discipline and forward thinking. As you can imagine, this is quite an inner battle, but that's just the inner conflict that enemy colors bring to the table. Alright, that's the first two steps covered when building our framework, but we still have one more aspect to cover, and that is discussing what the missing colors tell us about Jeskai, as their absence is yet another avenue for understanding a wedge or shard. In the case of Jeskai, our missing colors are black and green. Let's start things off with black. Black is the color of self-interest and a hunger for power. With a lack of black mana, we know that Jeskai is not the combination to focus only on what it needs. It is able to look to how it can be of service of others, or at the very least holds compassion in their heart. Next, we have green, the color of tradition and harmony. With a lack of green mana in Jeskai, we know that it is not the kind of combination that will get bogged down in the old ways, and is focused on always improving what came before. As well, it does not mind fighting for its place, or the upholding of its ideals, as conflict breeds evolution, and harmony breeds stagnation. Okay, there you have it, the framework for the wedge of Jeskai. With this at our disposal, it becomes easier to find possible philosophies that lie within this combination. In this video, I'll cover 3, but remember there are always more philosophies to be discovered. So if you have any new ideas about Jeskai, or ways to tweak the ones that I bring up here, then be sure to let me know in the comments, as I read each one. Also, if you are enjoying the video so far, then this is as good a time as any to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any future content. And hit that like button as it lets me know you enjoy my work. And with that, let's cover our first philosophy, and that is true self through discipline. Here we have an ideal that desires to utilize the explosive energy of red and the need for introspective self-discovery of blue. Jeskai is able to achieve this lofty goal through the discipline found in white. What this means, essentially, is that Jeskai understands that there is two strong and yet opposing forces within us that wish to take precedence, and yet it can balance these things by keeping a level of control. There is an ever-present force created when red and blue come together, one that is always waiting to explode forth. But instead of having it wreak havoc, it can be focused, instead becoming an energy that surpasses all. I think the only way I can illustrate what I mean is through breaking down each color present. In this context, red is the core, the drive. It's the heart, the impulse, a sort of motivating force that must be respected. Then there is blue. This color represents the mindfulness and forethought that dares to utilize every aspect of its being, all in order to find out what is the conclusion of its very existence. Then it takes white's discipline and systems of self-governance to grasp at both energies and pull them together to create something that could not be possible if it weren't for the colors present. So what does this look like? Well, let's imagine what happens when you take all of these aspects and give it a physical representation. I first think of those who practice the martial arts, of course. What we have here are people who harness the raw aggression and physical output that the human body is capable of. Then they harness that energy through discipline and regimental hierarchies of skill. Finally, applying learned techniques to add a level of efficiency and purpose. Now, of course, this is all well and good, and honestly, one ideal you probably saw coming. Nonetheless, it's one that I had to bring up, as it's a concept that I am a big fan of. Now, let's shift things from the self and move on to an aspect of Jeskai that could be applied to society as a whole, or at least small groups, in a philosophy I like to call prosperity in a creative society. There's no way we could talk about a wedge that contains both white and blue without discussing how the given combination would view and shape society. Now, this discussion becomes even more interesting when you include a color like red, a color that has little care for society, or at least structures that restrict one's ability to act out its impulses. But, as I said at the top, red is but an outsider here, and is forced into a position that merely influences the wedge's philosophy. Because of this, it is able to forego some freedoms in order to facilitate freedom of expression in others. So, what sort of world would a Jeskai philosophy look like, and how would it go about shaping it? Well, white-blue is the combination of colors that look to carefully craft a society that facilitates not just order, but an ever-evolving ideal of perfecting society. This does mean structures that stop all forms of chaos in order to better focus on how it can iterate on the culture it finds itself in. This includes a focus on learning, philosophy, and the infrastructures that facilitate self-improvement. This, of course, is far too cold of a world for red, and lacks a key component, creativity. You see, while white-blue is willing to work at things and is never satisfied, it still lacks that human aspect of art, creativity, and culture. So what this gives us is an ideal that not just creates a world where its inhabitants prosper, but also flourish. Jeskai says that the human mind does not just contain a need to learn and find peace, but to also fulfill its imaginative needs. Humans are beings of creative design, and it's in leaning into this impulsive ingenuity that Jeskai says we can actually find the perfection of humankind. In white, we have the structures that allow for peace, and in peace, we can concentrate on what is important to us. In blue, there's a need to work at a skill and discover something new that lies within us. And finally, red says that it's not just in intellect that we can find fulfillment, it's also in our creativity and passion. We see glimpses of this when we bring together red and blue, a combination of creative expression through science and to some degree art. So in the end, what we have is a society that creates an environment where art and science are supported in equal measure. As a society where all are free to pursue a skill that gives them a sense of value and meaning to their life, will be a better society for it. Alright, let's cover one last ideal of Jeskai. And oddly enough, I'm not sure I would call this one a philosophy exactly, rather a system for Jeskai to come to its conclusions. And that is wisdom through contest. This is an ideal of Jeskai that states simply enough, no idea is worth considering unless it can be put to the test. And in turn, no philosophy can shape its society unless it can stand against others. It is a way of thinking that is focused on challenging ways of thought, all in order to create a society that's better for it. One where each avenue is discussed until the clearest way reveals itself. In simplest terms, thought brought to action in service of the people. Let's break it down into the colors present and then move on to a bit of an example of what I mean. In white, we have the even and open playing field for discussion, one that wishes to do so with the aim of making society better. In blue, we have the need to learn, discuss, and perfect. And in red, we have the passion and desire to put those ideas to the test. What I find most interesting here is that philosophical thinking is something that comes pretty easy to Jeskai because of the combination of white-blue. What you might remember from the video I made covering that combination, and I'll have a link for that one in the description if you haven't, is that white-blue tends to be focused on philosophy and finds it actually quite important to society. Where white on its own would look to a higher power for answers, usually a religion, it instead moves towards a more flexible, intelligence-based way of governance, all because of the presence of blue. So instead of looking upwards, as white might be prone to do, it instead looks inwards to the wisdom we all hold within our own minds. What red brings to the table is the passion to share and test those ideas. Because as we established earlier, no idea is worth considering unless it can be put to the test. So what does this look like? Well, I think it's quite simple, really. What we have then is a society that wishes to perfect itself through the use of ever-evolving wisdom. Wisdom decided on through debate. It's a people who value the highest form of thought, all with an aim to create a better world. This version of Jeskai states that far too many nations fall under the weight of stupidity, and only in the testing and refining of thought, in a manner that's safe for all, can we come to a conclusion that's better for all. When you have a philosophy that combines the heart, the soul, and the mind, you end up with concepts that are as close to the human condition as any philosophy can have. It's aggression, impulse, and compassion. It's curiosity, intellect, and wisdom, all held within the container of our body and given purpose by our soul. Jeskai may stumble at times as it grapples with the forces within, but it will always find its footing and learn something about itself because of it. This idea is not just for the self, though. Whether we are one or many, there will always be conflicting ideas and the need to express them. But if we can all adhere to Jeskai's way, we can instead turn that into a mode of progress. This can mean creating spaces where we're able to express ourselves in a safe way, either through the debate of idea or the expression of physical mastery. All of these aspects are there to allow us to iterate through expression, in a manner where no idea or endeavor is wrong inherently. Because at the end of the day, to Jeskai, no idea is worth covering if it cannot first prove its merit. Well, there it is, Jeskai. I honestly am so happy to have finished this one. In the case of Sultai, our three colors are blue, black, and green, with blue and black as the allied pair. So let's break down this combination to find out more about the wedge of Sultai. Blue-black is the combination of manipulation, control, and most of all, ambition. It takes blue's need for constant improvement and iteration, and black's insatiable desire to obtain the power to achieve its every need. Together, becoming a force that is never satisfied with what it has, and never questions what is right. This combination is also the pair most comfortable with dark and forbidden magic, or any tools that can be used to further its ambitions. Tools others might be too morally object to utilize. So what does this tell us about Sultai? Well, of course it shows us that there is nothing off limits to this wedge, whether that be morally or functionally. It will be a wedge that knows what it wants and will go to any length to get there. Next, it is important to lay out the beliefs of the enemy color present. In the case of Sultai, that is green. This is because, while an outsider, it will still influence and add nuance to the combination's philosophies. So, what does green believe in? And what does it bring to the table? Well, green is the color of acceptance of its place within its given ecosystem. It looks to the past for answers and solidifies its future in traditions. Green is the color that does not look to change itself or the world around it, as everything and everyone is perfect the way it is. So what does this influence have on blue and black? And what can we infer about Sultai because of it? Well, green's influence adds perspective to the combination. It's not just about the future or what it needs. There are bigger forces at play. Now, of course, this will not change Sultai's forward momentum, but it will open its eyes to the world around it. As you can see, Sultai is remarkably interesting indeed. What sort of mindset is created when these colors come together? Well, to get to that point, we have to finish the final part of our foundation. As you see, to truly know a wedge or shard, it is quite important to reflect on the colors that are absent as well, as these missing ideals will place the final pieces of our puzzle in place. In the case of Sultai, our missing colors are red and white. So then, let's take a closer look and see what the absence of these colors tells us about this wedge. Let's begin with red. Red is the color of emotion, pure and simple. It is the heart that does not question its actions, for better or worse. So, with the lack of red mana present, we know that Sultai is guided by another force. It instead is guided by its mind, its desires, and a grander plan. Next is white. White is the color of peace and order. With the lack of white mana, we know that Sultai does not concern itself with the moral boundaries that others place on themselves. Black sees only itself, blue sees only the future, and green sees only the world and not the people. I bet you're already starting to understand Sultai, and a philosophy is beginning to form in your head. Well, hold on to that creative spark and let me know in the comments what you might imagine when you think of Sultai. I'd love to hear your perspective. That said, let's dive into 3 ideas that I formed while digging into the potential philosophies of the wedge of Sultai, beginning with power through manipulation. There's no way to talk about a combination that holds both blue and black within it without bringing up ideas of manipulation, control, and of the power taken from forbidden places. And yes, that even happens when green is involved. In fact, green places this control in the space of what is ancient, transforming it into a wedge that looks to the dark corners of nature for what it needs on the path to what it desires. We see this sort of perversion of nature taking place when green is combined with either blue or black, as either of those pairs look to how they can take what nature is and bend it to either something new or something of use. They do this by either forcing evolution or by looking to the end of nature's cycle, that which has died and begun to rot, and breathe life into something new by either staving off death or through the transformation of that which has died. You start to see that Sultai then takes all of these aspects and manipulates all that lives, all that rots, and all that has died, creating new forms from each place within nature's cycle. It, of all wedges and shards covered, is the most focused on how it can manipulate that which is discarded, forgotten, or forbidden. So how does this come to be with the colors present? Well, let's take a look. In blue, there is a need to utilize all at its disposal, always seeking new tools to achieve its ever-changing goals. In black, you have the amoral outlook that is willing to act on any avenue that will facilitate its needs. Finally, green provides the tools that blue and black seek. It is nature's gifts ready to be used. It is long forgotten magic, as old as the gods. Now, I hope you're beginning to form a picture of what I speak. Sultai is the combination that finds power and truth in dark and ancient corners, It's the forgotten places where the old gods whisper, the dead moan, and the rotting creatures howl. And if these places strike fear in you, then perhaps Sultai is not your wedge. For a weak heart has no place where even the shadows fear tread. Okay, well, that was fun being super dramatic, but hey, this is by no means the only side of Sultai. And in fact, this is one that you may have expected me to cover. So let's start to take things in a direction that is less about the dark actions taken and more of a broad outlook that you could apply to your own life. A sort of perspective that allows you to see things more clearly. And that is an ideal I call perspective through acceptance. Sultai is a combination that is able to manifest a clear path. What do I mean by this? Well, to put it plainly, Sultai has within it the combination of colors that represent the flow of humanity's existence. And in that, an understanding. It is able to see things clearly. In fact, more clearly, it would claim, than any other wedge or shard. You see, in Sultai, we have green, the color that is the basis of life, the foundation of all that is. Then we have blue, the color that manifests itself as the mode in which we desire to always press forward, fueled by curiosity. At the end of the track, we have black, the color of finality, death, and the eventual end of all things. What we have then is an understanding of the process in which the human condition is laid out for us like a map. But what good is this? Well, Sultai is able to gain clarity by appreciating what has come before it, by marching ever forward, and by being at peace with its eventual end. It can then act in a manner that is free from question. It's the ability to almost see things from far above, with a clarity that is mostly reserved for gods. In knowing this and appreciating its unwavering nature, it is able to utilize the full extent of all that has come before and all that will be, in a manner that facilitates its ambitions. It is a mindset that can build upon the traditions of its forefathers, march forward with a clear conscience, and finally be at peace when it all eventually ends. All while knowing that it gave everything it could, a life with no regrets. So what does this sort of philosophy mean then, for you and for me? And why is it important? Well, think of it this way. First, with a clear outlook as to the course of our lives, we can be free of all doubts as to the meaning and purpose of our existence. If all roads lead to an eventual end, then it becomes a matter of getting the most out of what your life can be. With green in mind, we can look to proven paths to find our way. What I mean by this is that in philosophies and traditions that have worked so well for others, we may have a stronger start. Then we move on to blue, which fills us with purpose and drives us to be the best we can be, through curiosity and the need to improve. Finally, in black we are given the knowledge of death and its finality. There is no second chance, and so in that we must make the most of our lives and accept the hand of the Reaper when it comes. Do not fear death, for death is unchanging. Fear instead a life not lived. I honestly hope this side of Sultai gives you a bit of inspiration, or at the very least, something to think about. But we're not done. Let's cover one more philosophy of Sultai before we close things off, and that is rooted ambition. One of Blue-Black's biggest strengths and weaknesses is its unrelenting focus on its ambitions. It always has an eye to what it wants, and in every action it makes, it moves ever closer towards its goals. Now, of course, this is a good thing, but the issue is that this starts to create a personality that is narcissistic and psychopathic, one that only sees others and the world around it as a means to an end. If you take Black's focus on self and Blue's cold calculated outlook, you begin to create a way of thinking that has a sort of tunnel vision, where there's only the self and the goal. This is where green comes in and helps Sultai along to be, well, more grounded. Green takes this unrelenting ambition and adds a wider view of things and creates a sense of calm and peace. But like I always say, let's go to the colors present to get a better picture of what I'm saying. In black, there's a need to do what is right for you, to take care of your needs first. In blue is the desire to improve at a constant rate. And in green, we have the perspective and harmony to slow all of those things down. With this mindset in place, Sultai is able to still act on its convictions, but it's able to know when to consider its impact, and not just the world around it, but how its actions shape itself as a person. What I mean is that if we're just blue-black going it alone, we would find ourselves more and more detached from the world and people around us, and eventually we would succumb to our more narcissistic and unfeeling side. Think of what sort of a shell of a person you become when all you are is your ambitions and you're consumed by your goals, with no time given to stop and breathe, to smell the flowers, to find peace. Now, don't get me wrong, ambition is important, taking care of yourself is important, but if all you have is yourself and ambition, then your humanity will surely wear down to nothing, until all you are is a soulless person who only hungers for money and power. There's more to our lives than that, and green is here to at least tell you, go for a walk, open your mind, and find value in things that are less tangible. Sultai is an interesting case, in that when it applies to more fantasy settings, it has a way of getting ahead of itself and acting almost like a supervillain. But if we apply it to real-world thinking, we can begin to see what power it has. It's a philosophy that is driven and curious, but is still able to be at peace due to its unique perspective. It is a philosophy that views the breadth of its life and in turn lives a life free of regret. To me, Sultai is a way of looking at things and seeing value in both the cultivation of self and the joy found in that which nature provides. For there is value to be found in places others might be too afraid to look. Well, thanks for checking out my Sultai video. I'm very happy to be finally done this one. So then, what does green and red, when combined, believe in? And how does this apply to Temur? Well, green-red is the pair who seeks the freedom to be its authentic self. It never stops to think about its actions, as it merely is acting upon its impulses and instincts, breaking life down to its most primal version. It believes its life is no accident, and because of this, following one's own heart is following one's own destiny. So, what does this tell us about Temur? Well, simply put, Temur follows its heart, its passions, and when it doubts itself or the meaning of things, it looks to nature as a sort of guide. For the originator of all life is the one with all the answers we need. With that covered, it's still important to talk about the enemy color within Temur, as even though I stated that it was an outsider, this does not mean its influence cannot be felt. In the case of Temur, the enemy color is blue. So what does blue believe in, and what does it add to the pair we already discussed? Blue is the color of intellect, curiosity, and an endless desire to iterate and improve. It is always looking to the future, to what can be discovered and mastered. Now, obviously this amount of thoughtfulness goes against red-green, but it's not this side that really gets added to Temur. When combined with red-green, blue adds more of a sense of wonder and curiosity, a need to know. What exactly do I mean? Well, it's blue's curiosity and mastery where green and red can both find a level of appreciation, and so you see these ideals seep into Temur's philosophy. Alright, construction, so to speak, is nearly complete, and Temur is beginning to take shape. But we're not done yet. To finish off our framework, we still have one more step, and that is the two colors that are missing. Yes, it does sound weird, but what is not present in a wedge or shard is actually quite important, as knowing what something cannot be or won't be tells us a lot about a combination. In the case of Temur, the missing colors are white and black. So let's start with white. White is a combination of community, order, and of selflessness. With a lack of white mana present, we know that Temur accepts the fate that nature hands out. There will always be a predator and a prey. It also tells us that Temur does not obey the laws of man, as those are constructs used to control, and freedom is key. Next, we have black. Black is the color that is primarily concerned with self, of its power, and the ability to act out its own will. With a lack of black mana, we know that Temur is not concerned with the grabbing and holding of power, and is able to look past itself, and in turn, views the bigger picture as more important than even its own existence. And there it is, the framework for Temur. With this at our disposal, we will be able to come up with our own philosophies. Of course, I will present 3 to you in this video, but remember that color philosophy is malleable. There's always more to discuss and discover. So if you have any ideas about Temur, then please be sure to share them. I do love reading over how each person views the colors of magic. Alright, let's dive into the first philosophy, and that is Mother Nature's right hand. At the core of any philosophy, there lies a view of its physical surroundings, and how it affects and is affected by it. In the case of Esper, it was society. In Sultai, it was life and death. And in the case of Temur, it is Mother Nature herself. The goddess of origination, of no form and all forms, of all that was and is, of the very earth we can thank for our existence. Temur being a color that, on a basic level, represents each of her core elements, has a unique perspective as to the power and beauty that is the plane we all call home. It's the erupting mountains of red, which breed new lands and remove the old. It's in blue's oceans and skies, which breathe life into our mortal bodies. And it's green's vast forests and beasts where we make our homes and feed our families. Temur has a perspective that no other wedge or shard can mimic. It's a close tie to the ancient wonders of our mortal plane. Where some look past this life to what lies beyond, Temur has its feet firmly planted on their plane soil. It understands completely the unbiased hand of Mother Nature, and in fact, it is a willing participant in all that she gives and takes away. Temur looks at her for answers, and heeds the ones it is given. There is no give and take, there is only fear and respect, and in this position, a wonder at her majesty. In blue, there is that sense of true understanding, and wonder of what makes up all life. In red, there is a joy at moving alongside the controlled chaos of nature. And in green, there is the acceptance and harmony found in knowing one's own place. Because of this ideal, Temur is the wedge that acts on her behalf. It does not sit by when others look to pervert her, nor does it question her actions. If an earthquake destroys what you have built, it is because she did not want it to exist there. If a fire clears a forest, it is because she wishes to grow something new. And if the winds thrash your crops, it's because she wishes to carry your seeds somewhere else. Do not stand stiff in the wind, for you will be blown over. Flow with her movements, and you will come to understand what she needs of you. This is normally where I bring up an MTG quote, but in this case, we'll look to a quote from the late Bruce Lee. This, of course, is a very physical manifestation of Temur beliefs, and gives you a good idea of what lies at the core of this philosophy. Wonder, understanding, passion, and an acceptance of what is and what will be. It's the kind of thing that comes along with the colors we have at our disposal. But let's now move on to something that takes a closer look at self, and how one would seek its place in a tenet I call purpose in curiosity. Talking about the Temur mindset in broad strokes is all well and good, but I think it is important to dive into the why of Temur. How does this mind work, and how is it applied? Well, Temur has a big picture mindset, all while staying low to the ground. It wishes to understand its purpose while still flowing along with whatever comes next. In a lot of ways, it's laid back and open to change, all while looking for the understanding that pieces everything together. Temur can find joy just as much in a blade of grass as in the eruption of a volcano. If everything that Mother Nature provides is a gift, then every day holds within it the potential for discovery and adventure. In green, Temur finds harmony with all things, and the tools to understand its place. In red, there lies the joy and passion that gives it purpose. And in blue, there is the curiosity and the need to understand, even if that understanding leads to a place of tranquility. Temur might be the wedge to experiment with Mother Nature's gifts in order to gain that connection and understanding. Nature already provides us with the means to do so. If you pick the right mushroom, you can feel her breath. If you smoke the right herb, you can find tranquility in her hands. Temur is always looking to learn more about how to fit into such a vast and seemingly perfect ecosystem, all while still enjoying the experience for its own sake. We see this need to experiment and understand within the combination of red-blue all too well. It's just instead of using science to fill that need, it looks to the trees, to the vast mountains, and to the sky. Within this mindset, Temur can find itself lost in thought and action. But if everything around you is your home, are you ever really lost? This idea is a lot of fun, and honestly, I think we could all use this sort of vast introspection and acceptance at least once in a while in our life, as the ever-enclosing cities around us have removed some of that need, a need our ancestors knew all too well. Perhaps through ritual and experimentation, we might gain a deeper understanding of Mother Nature, and in turn, our own existence. Alright, let's cover one more philosophy before we close this one out, and that is freedom in experience. Temur is one of those combinations that appreciates freedom in any form. And that's not really a surprise, with red and green at its core. It wants to live outside of man's law and experience its life the way it was meant to, in the wild. But what does blue have to say about this? Well, simply put, blue is more than fine with this, as long as there's a driving purpose. So what is the purpose found in freedom among nature? Well, simply put, it takes skill and experience to live in the wild, skills that must be mastered. This version of Temur will often find itself alone, a hermit, where it is free to act as it sees fit, and to take nature's examples as the only true law, a law that is loose and open to interpretation, and one that does not limit one's actions. Think of it more as a guide. This hermit version of Temur will often find itself as a druid, a hunter, or a sage. It lives out in the wild, honing its craft and steering clear of any human influence, becoming more of a beast among beasts than a human trying to carve out a home. In green, we see the need to act as a piece of nature's puzzle. In red, there is the desire to experience unobstructed freedom of action. And in blue, we receive the mastery of a craft which will facilitate this freedom. Imagine this, a hunter, draped in skins of their kills, face grizzled with age, speaking a language not quite human or beast, and with the ability to become a part of the landscape it finds itself within. A long time ago, this was humanity's default, but through incremental conveniences and a reliance on one another, this version has been stripped away. This is not to say this person does not exist anymore, but as time goes, they become ever rarer. An ideal society to Temur would be one where humanity sheds its cities in favor of huts and caves, a society where people rely only on nature and the skills acquired through time spent honing your craft within nature. This, of course, is a very antisocial mindset, but Temur claims that our modern conveniences are what will be our eventual extinction. If we continue to build our cities and strip away Mother Nature's gifts, then we deserve our fate. For long after we cease to be, she will continue to exist, and hopefully the next life form to spring up appreciates what they've been given. Temur is the wedge that finds purpose and understanding through its closeness with Mother Nature. It understands its place within the plane it calls home, and allows nature to work her magic. For nature will act as it wishes whether we stand against it or not. It is then important to look to her with fear and respect, and in doing so, gain insight that others may miss. The answers won't come easy though, and it's up to us, not nature, to find our way. This may require us to experiment, using her tools to grasp at the deeper concepts of our existence, while being sure to take in the joy and wonder of it all every step of the way. If this way of thinking pulls you further from your humanity, then so be it. For humans have become a curse upon the Creator, and she will exist long after we are gone. So it's best to walk alongside her than to stand against her. For it is through Mother Nature that we may know true freedom. and anyone who does not see this has blinded themselves by their own hand. Well, I hope you enjoyed that compilation. If it does well enough, I will consider giving some of my other completed series the same treatment. Like I said at the top, I want to thank my Patreons especially, Gam, Danielle, Draconino, and Shamrock for their support. And if you want to become a Patreon, then links as always are down below. With that, friends, I'll catch you in the multiverse. Bye.